Yeah, so it was different in different places. I mean, when I lived in Petrinja, for example, this was in the so-called Republika Srpska Krajina, and the people there were they were sort of 95% Serbs. There were these Croats left in villages in the region, and I would go visit them, and they lived lived pretty miserably. But the Serbs there lived pretty miserably too. There wasn't any kind of public life, and whenever I'd go to Zagreb, I occasionally would ask neighbors, "What do you want? Do you need anything?" Which I would smuggle through, and they always asked for vegeta, was the thing that they always missed. So I'd always be smuggling in big things of vegeta and various kinds of pizza ketchup and stuff like that, because people were living on those sorts of things. And then, and so it was difficult during the war. But then I went to Zagreb, and so in Zagreb I was just living in Zagreb, and everyone was kind of normal for the most part.
Can you maybe tell us more about how people started separating, how that separation between ethnicities became clearer, sharper?
Oh, it just, I mean, the war defined ethnicity as the only kind of thing. And everybody knew who the Croats were in the sector, because, it was these small villages, so everybody knew everybody knew who they were. 30 years, 20 years earlier, they'd all gotten along more or less, and now everyone knew who they were. And so, and if you were a Croat in the sector, what we called the sector in the Republika Srpska Krajina, then it was very difficult for you. And one of the things I did as a UN official is we'd get requests from the Croatian Red Cross that so-and-so is ill and needs medical treatment that can only be provided in Croatia. So I did a number of these, and then one of my people that worked with me did them, is I would do these medical evacuations. And there was a lot of kind of bureaucratic stuff, approvals that needed to be signed and all this. And then you would go to their house and you would take them out. And you would have to do a visit first, and you'd be. I remember going to a house that the windows probably hadn't been opened in 20 years. It had this, and so they opened the windows for us, so there'd be fresh air. And they apologized for the propuh, as we say in Zagreb. What do they say here in? Yeah, promaja, but in Croatian it's propuh. They apologized for the propuh, and my interpreter said, "Oh no, we love propuh." I remember this really clearly. And so they lived pretty badly, and ordinary people lived badly. It was this domination. There was a movie, Cold Mountain, which I think there's an Academy Award or two for acting that went to it.
Yes, that was in 2003.
That's a movie about the South and the Civil War, during the Civil War, that just shows the way in which these kind of local bands controlled these cities, terrorized, and it was sort of a bit like that. So that, where things really, the place where I was in Gorazhdë in 1994, and it's a kind of a well-known case. There was this great graphic novel or graphic book written about Gorazhdë by Sako. I can't remember his first name. And this is right after there had been this siege for about a month or so, and then in which the Serbs were trying to, because Gorazhdë is right on the Drina River, and the Serbs wanted, their strategic interests were to make it a Serb place, and the Bosniaks were holding out, and effectively, pretty much. And in the end, there was a deal that was cut, and then I went in with a group of, this was Sérgio Vieira de Mello and General Subiru, who was the French general who was in charge of Sector Sarajevo, and then a whole bunch of civil affairs officers and other military guys and police and stuff. And we went in, and I ended up staying there for a month, leading negotiations. And it's a very complicated agreement that, I don't know, it would take me 10 minutes to describe it, so I won't do it. But you were asking about the people, and the people had lived for, they'd been for like 2 months or something in basements and things. And, that when we came in, all of a sudden they were free and people are walking out. And it's like seeing these photographs after World War II. I remember really distinctly in the midst of this rubble, because there had been some bombing and stuff, there was a woman who was dressed beautifully, with lipstick and everything. And you wonder where she got it or where she preserved it from, and just walking through these things. And then they were in storefronts, in stores, families were living, they had goats and things. I mean, it was really amazing at the very beginning, the situation there. And so, and then the thing about the war is that later, after the war, it's like you meet people from these places. So I met Serb refugees from Gorazhdë, people who grew up in Serbia, in Užice, someone who was from Gorazhdë. So, that it's like it affected everybody horribly. Ordinary people suffered tremendously, and so they depended on their leaders and things. So,
how long did you stay?
In Gorazhdë, I was there for about 2 or 3 months.
No, entirely. You mentioned that region.
I worked for the UN from April.
Were you going back and forth, or?
No. For me, headquarters was always somewhere Zagreb, Vukovar, Sarajevo, and Prishtinë. Those were the kind of mission headquarters. Those were the 4 missions I worked for. But I spent time I was the FYROM, as we called it, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, the official name at the time. I was the FYROM desk officer. So I would go down to I remember in '94 when there was this threat of a conflict. So I went down. We had an office. We had a mission down there, and I remember meeting with Arben Jafari. And there was another Jafari who led one of the other parties, and then I met with guys from the Macedonian parties, and we were trying to figure out. This is when they were trying to establish the University of Tetovo, which was seen as dangerously radical stuff and all of that. And so, and I recall cab drivers telling me, there's going to be war. There's going to be war. And of course, there wasn't war in Macedonia. So I spent my time going in lots of different places. And so I was basically based in Zagreb from '93 to '96. Then I was in Vukovar from '96 to '97. Then I was in Sarajevo from '97 to '99. And I was in Prizren from '99 to 2000, to the end of 2000.
Oh, wow. When did you come to Prizren?
In June of '99.
That's the very beginning.
Yeah, well, I mentioned that Sérgio Vieira de Mello, and he is the UN official who was killed in Iraq in 2003. And Sérgio had been the head of civil affairs in the old days, and I worked very closely with him in Gorazhdë. He was there for a week, and I was his note taker and stuff. And then I was on the phone with him every day as we were trying to move these negotiations forward. And he knew that I think I sent you the article list, this article I published, Crisis in Kosovo. And he knew I knew Kosovo. And so when he came he was named the ad interim special representative of the Secretary General. He wanted to put together a team, and there was a great team, and he wanted me on the team. And so my boss in Sarajevo didn't want me to come. And so this is true. She told me Kofi Annan's chef de cabinet called her at dinner and said, "You got to let Baskin go." So the next day, I went the next day, and I saw Sergio and some others. And then he sent me to Prizren. And some of the people on that mission, the guy who organized my trip to Prizren and then later worked for Kushner as a political advisor, my whole time there, was a German diplomat named Axel Dietmann, who Axel was most recently the ambassador to Serbia. He left about a year ago. and now he's back in Berlin. And I'd run into Axel later. So some of the people that came through the mission were really very gifted, talented people. Axel was an excellent political officer.
How was Prishtinë in the end? Can you tell us about those first days when you were settling in?
Yeah, well, there have been reports. There have been reports of Prishtinë had been destroyed, or there had been a lot of bombing there. And there had been in places like Žur and in Krusha, and Mada and Krusha, Vogel. But in Prishtinë itself, there really wasn't that much. The Germans were already there. There were all these journalists who I'd known from the old days, American journalists. Roy Gutman, who was the guy who discovered the camps in Bosnia in 1992. Roy was there. This other guy who, they made a movie about him, who was reporting in Afghanistan, Jonathan Landay. He was there, and I know John, was a good friend of mine. And then it was really anarchic at the time, and people were coming in there, the UN or I guess it was the UN who announced this, but I don't know. We had tried to create a situation where the refugees wouldn't return for a month or two while we sorted things out. While we tried to establish ourselves. But they of course came back immediately. So while I was going in, I would see these columns of, I assume, Serbs leaving. There were Albanians coming in from Kukësin, from Skopje. And the first days was really, really rough. I was brought in by some guys from OSCE, and we stayed. So they kind of hooked us up and set up some meetings for us, and and so I ended up staying there for about a month in this one family whose son, you probably know his son. It's Shporta. I stayed in Ara Shporta's house for my first month that I was there. And his mother, who I ran into the other day, she now works in Sudan or Somalia for the UN. And so it's kind of sort of amazing, And then, and pretty quickly, because some of these OSCE people knew that we were there, so I met sort of key figures in town. The Orthodox churchmen were still there, and I remember having meetings with them. And the Germans that were setting up, and there was also Dutch K4. Those are the two contingents I remember, but Austrians were there as well, I think Swiss. You always can feel confident when you have the Swiss army defending you. No, but they did a lot of great civil affairs work, actually. And so...
you mentioned OSCE because they were better acquainted with the place.
They were already there. Yeah, and the guy who brought me in, I wish he had been the head of the office. I mean, he was a great guy. He was this British policeman who brought me in, but, it was fine. And, but, when he came in, we're walking down the street with this guy. Because I worked with policemen. The mission I was in Bosnia was a policing mission. What we did is that we helped advise and we helped develop training systems and all this for police. And so I worked closely with British police, so I got along with these guys well. And as we're walking down, he points to this young woman and he says, "You should hire her, she's great." So I hired her. And she became my assistant, and now she's rather senior within the EUSR, that's have to say. So all these people that I hired back in 1999, some people have stayed in the international community, others have. There's a guy I just ran into, I walked into Soma about a month ago, and he says, "Mark," he says, "You don't remember me, do you?" He says, "I used to do your IT." I go, "Oh." I said, "It's great to see you." And then he goes, I said, "So what are you doing now?" He says, "Well, I own Giraffa." Oh. So, and then he told me his story. It was an amazing story, how he worked for the UN for a number of years. He had an option to either stay with the UN and go off to Africa, I think it was, or he could have gone and done a degree in the U.S. and chose the latter path, and then this led him. So, I mean, this is amazing what happened. And there were all these kind of young, bright people, and I was really kind of amazed and really impressed with just how cool they were. And and at the same time, then, so I went there so what I did is I went there for a few days, about 4 or 5 days, and I went back and I reported to the headquarters the situation. And then they said, well, where do you want to go? And I wanted to be the regional administrator, but those were political positions, governments owned. And I couldn't, so they said, you can be deputy wherever you want. And I had a choice between going to Mitrovica and Prizren. And I chose Prizren because it was really nice. And
can you describe what deputy meant?
that meant, so I was the second most I was the second highest ranking UN official in the region. And in the Prizren region, we covered Prizren, Suvoreka, Dragaš, Orahovac, and then some people from Mališev came. Mališev was not yet a municipality, and they told me that they had been, in the 80s, they were about to create a municipality when the Serbs kind of came in and took over and changed everything, and would we support them in that? And so I then went to the kind of the people that we took to be influential in Rahovac, Prizren, and Suvoreka, because it would have taken land from all those. And I said, what do you think? Would you mind? And they said, of course not. So we then created Mališev, or it was then created. And so my responsibilities there, and then I was there alone for the first month or so before Leonard came, before the regional administrator came. He was a Swede. And in this time, early on, I was the only expat from the UN, especially early on. There was a UNHCR guy who was there briefly, and then he left and someone else came in. And OSCE was there, but they only had a few people at the time because they had all evacuated during the bombing. And at the time, every day in Prizren, anywhere from 4 to 10 houses were being burnt. And on Kalaya, that area behind the river, in areas where Serbs had lived before. And the head of the military comes to me and says, well, this is your job. I mean, this is civilian burning houses. It's not a military thing. And I said, well, I'm the only one that's here. And they said, well, when are you going to get your police here? And it took a while because these kinds of missions, we don't have, it's not like the U.S. Army. You can just go to Fort Bragg or whatever, and you can send in 1,000, 2,000 people. You just can't do. We don't.
So you didn't have police with you?
We didn't. I had a couple of policemen from Bosnia, but the mandate, and this gets into really complicated issues of public administration in a way. The mandate was completely different. Our mandate in Kosovo, in UNMIK, was we were the government. The mandate in Bosnia is that we were not the government. We were advising. So the policemen were not trained to do that. They had no. And then in the end, I only had a couple of policemen. I remember I had an Indian, some kind of senior Indian police commander, who was not much that he could do. So we tried to do things, right? We tried to do stuff, but the houses were still burning, and
when it became like stable status for people there, did you also have curfews, right?
we did have curfews in Prizren, yeah. I think we had the curfew pretty much the whole time I was there. I'm not that's a detail that I could probably look up and see. But we had it for a long time. And once we began by August, September, we were able to do things a little better. And because the Germans, in their defense, I mean, it was my feeling, you have 6,000 troops here, maybe you can do something. And they go, oh, we have other things to do. And they did, in fact, have other things to do. There were lots of stuff that they had to do. And they also were going out and doing the civil affairs stuff in the field, providing meals to people and doing that kind of thing. And then they were setting up and building up their camps. It's all the things that needs to get done if you're going to have an effective operation. So it's not that they were just sitting around and making fun of us. I mean, they were doing their things. And so it was just a very difficult time. And early on, we worked very closely together with the military, OSCE, UNHCR. We'd have daily meetings, what's going on. And there were, it was a very difficult situation. And so about 3 weeks in, the German general says, yeah, this is right around the time Leonard came, just before Leonard came. The German general says to me, I've got 75 people in jail because his military police were working as police, but they're not really policemen. And he says, and this is serious stuff. I mean, they were arrested for serious things. What are you going to do with them? Because that really was a civilian thing. So I asked my friends, or in the headquarters, the lawyers, what should we do? And they said, they were creating an emergency judiciary in Prishtinë. And they said, well, why don't you create an emergency judiciary? And so this one UN lawyer, told me what I needed to do in terms of stuff. And with my assistants, we called all the lawyers and all the judges and prosecutors from Prishtinë. We met with them. And then we worked with OSCE. They filled out an application. OSCE, I think, vetted it. I also had a number of us. It was like the scholarships that you went on. We did this vetting process, and then we had interviews, and then we created this emergency judiciary. And it was, there were some issues and problems with it, which I won't go into. But I also conducted what I believe is the first wedding in post-war Kosovo.
Really?
Yes, I did. So this is what happened. Well, we had Edita Tahiri, who was then part of the LDK presidency, and very influential. And she wanted to introduce us to Ecem Kreziu, who was head of LDK. Yeah, Ecem Kreziu, who was head of LDK in Prishtinë. So we met, and and Ecem was he was very nice. We had a nice meeting. And Edita was very tough at this meeting, saying that, you guys are the government, you have to establish order, you have to make sure that our people are protected, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And she was very tough. And then, at the end of the meeting, she then takes me aside and she goes, and I didn't know her, although I knew of her. And she said, Mark, she says, my niece is engaged to get married. And there is nothing, there are no established norms for any of this. And so, and you guys are the government, so would you conduct the wedding? So again, I checked with Prishtinë just to make sure that everything was fine. And it turned out that it was interesting. So we had to create all these documents. We had to create a marriage certificate. So they'd said that you have to do this, this, and this, because Serbs took a lot of the documentation away, and we weren't gonna follow on from what they had been doing anyways. So we created this document, and then we began. So we were the first in Prishtinë. We were kind of pioneers in creating all these new documents, including birth certificates and all this kind of stuff. And so then it came down to the ceremony. And so one of my friends, who sadly just passed away, Baskin Nevzati, just died a few months ago, and he was a lawyer. And I turned to Baskin and said, listen, can you help me come up? So he went, we looked at the Yugoslav marriage law code, And then we drafted something that was based on that, but for the new circumstance. And then we did it, and I was really enthusiastic. I thought I'd be able to learn Albanian at the time. So we wrote it all out in Albanian, and so then we conducted this wedding service. And, you know, Edita was there, her niece, and et cetera. And this was in our headquarters, which was in the old Bancos right on the river. And we didn't control the whole building. I think Agron Sporta, I think he had an office in that building from the old days. And so there's this piped in music. And all of a sudden, as I'm conducting the wedding and I'm reading the speech I had in Albanian, I hear the song in the piped in music, "Listen to Your Heart" from Roxette. It totally freaked me out. So now whenever I think of, you know, the lead singer of Roxette just died, it made me think of the wedding in Prishtinë.
Why was it important to be legal? I mean, I'm just asking this since it's a very cultural question for us, and it's not like we always marry legally. We all also do it.
Yeah, common law.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you should ask. What?
When was this?
It was,
Right after?
it must have been early July, early to mid-July 99.
Okay.
Something like that. It wasn't much later. And, you know, I think, you know, I think that there was a sense, it came from LDK, but it also came from the sense that, you know, we have this new government, that they were working closely with the UN, and that we need to establish something that is ours, that it does not come from the earlier system that was discriminatory and all that kind of stuff. And so,
Did you conduct more weddings after that?
no, that was the only one I did. Although I did, I did it later on in September 2000, as in the run-up to the first election, where there was these municipal elections in October 2000. Bernard Kouchner, his intention was to visit every municipality. I was at that time the municipal administrator in Prizren, so I was working with his guys, and so we arranged to have a whole visit where he met with the municipal council, the administrative board. He had a town hall meeting. We had him visit the League of Prizren, and Bernard knew very well the guy who had been my interpreter at the very beginning of the mission, because there were these issues having to do with sort of legal issues, and Hassan would go and he was the interpreter. So he would go to Pristina with these judges from Prizren, and so he knew Bernard pretty well. And Hassan was getting married. And so we arranged, you know, this whole thing and I said, so, you know, Bernard, you can marry Hassan because, you know, you're the head of state, theoretically. And he did. So, yeah, so the day went is that he had these meetings with us, and we brought him to the League of Prizren. We walked along the river. We went to Tesulia for this big lunch, when Sulia really outdid himself with all these taverns, et cetera. And then we walked to our headquarters. He had a town hall meeting during this, and walked to our headquarters, and then he married Hassan and Nazmia, and it was fantastic. It was really funny. It was great though. And Kouchner turns to me right before the ceremony and goes, "Can I really do this?" I said, "Of course."
But you're also describing this moment in time which necessitated, it asked from you to start stuff from scratch, and you described it because you just told us how you conceptualize the law to bring two people together, basically. But what about other fields? Like you had to basically consult the older law, the current, or what was the current law, to be able to create something that would fit this new society that you were here to set it up.
So at the broadest level, I was not involved in that. I mean, there wasn't, because we brought in guys, we brought in sort of lawyers who had experience in international operations or whatever, and that they were trying to, and they were rewriting the law code, et cetera. The criminal code, then there's the civil code, and we did our best. And when I look back at what we did in 99, 2000, it was all sort of like a Band-Aid. It was a stopgap while something better, I mean, something more enduring could be created. Because nothing really enduring could actually begin to be created until January of 2000, when they created the PISG, the Provisional Institutions of Self-Governance. And so everything that we did before was sort of, and we did do some stuff. I mean, I created a municipal council in Prizren, but there were some difficulties. And one of the things that I did, and with the division of labor between me and the regional administrator, was that he was a senior administrative guy from Sweden, and so he knew how to run big organizations. And I established municipal councils in all of those municipalities. So in Suvareka, Ralvets, Malishev, and Dragaš. And so I would go visit, and we would, you know, we met people there, and we would see who are the, you know, who various political parties and others who were the business people and people who had worked in the administration before 1990. And we tried to, you know, set things up. My approach was, to me, what had happened from the period of 1989 to 1999 was a period of irregular, I refer to it as a kind of system of socialist apartheid or whatever you want to call it, but it was you know, when all the ethnically Albanian people were fired, and other people were brought in, I thought that what we should do to start the new system is to return to the status quo ante and to go back to where it was before. So what I tried to do was to get all of the managers and directors to return to Perlanka and to Pharmakos and to Printex and all those, you know, big.
Did you have at the time a vision about these corporates, socially owned corporates? I mean, as an administrator, was it part of your job to think about the economy as well?
Wasn't, yes, but we ended up, over time, people came in who were theoretically, they were experts in those kind of areas. But early on, you know, you did everything. And we were trying to reestablish, you know, we were trying to get things going. I mean, we organized, we negotiated, you know, the sale of wine, because there's all this wine in the area. And Leonard, my Swedish boss, he brought in a Swedish wine vinter, who we came to. This was one of the best afternoons I spent, was we went to all the vineyards in the area, from Suvareka to, we didn't go to Rahovac, because, well, we know Rahovac, we didn't go to Čakov, because that was not our region. And we went wine tasting. And we all got really lit, drunk, while this wine taster would drink the wine, you know, and spit it out. And, you know, we determined that the wine was quite good, and then we began, and then there were these traditional markets for this wine in Germany and other places. And so that there were efforts to, you know, we kind of, we were the government, we were in charge of that. And my feeling was that the people that were in positions of authority before 1989 should return, and then whatever was going to happen would happen. I also knew when it came to businesses, having seen what happened in other places in Yugoslavia and in Eastern Europe, that most of the socialist businesses were not very profitable, et cetera, and that there would need to be that kind of transition as well. But I felt that the people who should be at least there initially were the ones who had been there before. And so my whole approach to the government, this was my own thing. I mean, I told my various people that that's what I was trying to do, but, you know, different people in different regions, they found different ways of doing it, I suppose. But, you know, we tried to bring in the old the old team, and I don't know how well it worked, but that's what we tried to do.
What was your relationship to provisional government from 2000 and onward? Like, was there a...
Actually, it was from June of '99 onwards. You're thinking about the provisional government led by Prime Minister Thatcher.
Yeah, it was like a parallel institution, like local, and then there was only above it. So how did that
This is
work?
one of those areas where I don't really want to go into too much detail. Just to say, it was clear under Security Council Resolution 1244 that was supported by the full range of powerful governments and the Security Council and everyone, that the authority was had by the UN, and that we were to establish an interim administration, and that we were to help to train them. And so when people presented themselves to us to say that, well, we're the guys that are in power, we said, thank you, we want to work with you, but in fact, we're the ones. And so we tried to integrate with them as much as possible, but it was a very difficult time, and sometimes there were others that were not, and so we wanted to bring everybody in. And early on, one of the things that I did was, so everyone meant there are all these really small little parties that don't exist anymore, that I can't even remember the names of. Some are really radical parties, some are some Intervistë parties of some sort. And then there was, LDK was a big party. PDK didn't exist yet. AAK didn't exist yet. Ramush was for a while head of the TMK of the KPC in Prizren, and he used to meet with us weekly before he left, and then began to pursue his career in politics. And so we tried to integrate them all. We would have liked to have integrated the Serb structures, those who remained, and there was a few Serbs who remained, and as long as they remained in Prizren, they were part of our team too. Early on, we had 2 or 3 what we called roundtables, symbolically modeled after what they had done in Poland. This idea is that you bring everybody and try to get, what do you need to do? What should we do? And early on, we had everybody. We even had some we had Orthodox church people there. We had, in Prizren, it was pretty diverse ethnically. We had Bosniaks and, Gorani, and obviously Turkish, and so.
Was it easier, or do you have a comparative perspective to think whether it was easier than in other places to bring these people from the same people?
Well, what happened is that over time, some of the people left. I mean, the Orthodox churchmen left. I mean, for example, and so they were no longer there. The Turks remained, and there were, there were 2 contending Bosniak parties at the time, and this was before Vakat was created, but there were these other guys, and so as long as I was there, I went out of my way to try to bring in, to keep it as diverse as possible ethnically, and to make sure that the people that to make sure that Prizren remained Prizren. And I don't know how successful I was at that, or we were, it's not just me, but,
Were there killings at the time? Like, I recall this commander being killed, but I'm wondering, were you at that time, or whether this happened later? But how did you?
No, it happened when I was there. I knew him quite well.
And how did you guys handle that? Did your mission permit you to act in those situations, or how did you manage?
They still have not.
Huh?
There's been a couple of trials over the murder of Ekrem Reja, which is Commandant Rini. but they still haven't concluded the case. And he was someone who worked very closely with us. He was an amazing, I thought, an amazingly gifted guy. And I don't know what to say. I mean, I know a lot about this. And I remember the day that he was shot. I was the acting regional administrator at the time. Leonard was away. And after the morning meeting, we had morning prayers, we call them morning. We had morning meetings every day. And at the end of the morning, what's going on, who's doing what, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the morning meeting, my interpreter came, the translator came and said, Akram's been shot. And he's at the German medical facility. So I went, and he was dead. And his brother was there, who had just come from Sarajevo. That was the first time I met him, Rushdie. And then I went and visited the family. And for me, it was one of the most depressing moments of my entire UN mission, because he was someone whose English, this is like yours, his English was almost perfect. His mother was from Drenica. His father was Slavic Muslim. So he was a JNA officer formerly. And he had served in Croatia, so we used to joke, speaking, Zagrebačka šatra and stuff. We would speak all this, slang. And he was very creative, and he was really kind of an impressive guy. And who knows what would have happened had he stayed alive, because lots of things have happened. But I was looking into trying to send him to Harvard to go to this mid-career. I mean, he was the kind of guy who could have, who would have done well. Spend Ahmeti later went to that. I think that he would have done very well there. And so, I was writing off to my academic friends in the States to see what we could do, because I knew that there was. And so it was a really sad moment.
Were there more of these?
Not too many. There were some. There were some cases of Bosniaks in Tusus, in the Tusus area. And that's another case that hasn't been solved. I think in January 2000. The Skandari family. I was looking at this recently again. And there, 3 people were killed. No one's ever found who did it. And, and the Tusus area of Prizren is kind of an area that was sort of a bit wild in terms of construction and all that. And it was ethnically mixed. So at the time, we tried to do things. When you take an event like this, and they came and met with me, so the Bosniaks, and so I would try to set up kind of neighborhood policing things, and then I met with the kind of I was not yet the municipal administrator, so I was doing this in the region, and so I met with the guys from the municipality and said, "Are you willing to, some common projects, fixing the school, cleaning up a park, trying to have some things where they'd work together," and they said they would do it, and then I'm not sure what happened, that because I was quite senior, and so I would get something going, and then I would give it to them, and then who knows what would happen. And in the end, a lot of these initiatives that I thought didn't get fully realized.